Oi, oi, it's your boy, Jack Slack. This is the Jack Slack podcast, and it's the podcast where we talk about fights. And you find me in rather a good mood because the Yair Rodriguez Max Holloway, not only the fight, but the card was pretty good, but the fight was very good. I've watched it a couple of times now, not 49 times yet, but a few times now, and I've really enjoyed it every time. It was a very peculiar matchup, and we talked about it a lot on the Boycast. A lot of things we talked about on the Boycast that weren't even specific to this fight. Like I got questions about wrist control with gloves and stuff, and all of it seemed to come up in this fight. So go and watch. I'm not going to recount it all here. I'll touch on it, but I've got bills to pay. Go join the Boycast. But yeah, I think most of us expected that. Well, Max was the huge betting favourite because obviously he's Max Holloway. He's beaten just about everyone in featherweight MMA, including the champion. If you think he won those, but certainly close enough with the champion that it's very clear that there's those two and then the rest of the division. However, a lot of us expected, with Yair, there's always the spaz out potential. He brings interesting skills that you don't see a lot. I did say that like the spaz out potential, or the typical spazzing out that everyone focuses on, the Yair style, well, Yair / Zabit style spinning back kicks and shit that don't actually achieve all that much. The thing to watch with Yair is the low kick and the body kick when he switches stance, because they come real quick, and it's all hidden by this layer of weird shit as well. But no, he was probably not going to Rolling Thunder Max Holloway in the first 30 seconds. But I think a lot of us suspected that his body kicks and low kicks might really trouble Max early. And of course, you've got the issue that Yair hasn't fought that many great fighters. He's had a lot of time to build up, and he's also had a lot of time between fights. In fact, before we go on, let's just touch on the fact that Yair Rodriguez is the only person, except Nick Diaz, who was in exile at the time, the only person that USADA has ever caught missing 3 drug tests, which would be like an indictment on Yair, but I think he's probably just dumb enough that he let that happen. But that's that's the truck-sized loophole in USADA testing, which is it only works if you tell them where you are. And if they think about how expensive it is, not only to test people, but also to hire testers to go and visit you in the middle of the night or the middle of the day or whatever. And there are 600 fighters on the roster, and there are X thousand athletes being tested by USADA at any time. So if you pick 2 weeks of the year where you want to go off to Cuba and blast roids, Cuba was just, a random choice there. If you pick 2 weeks of the year, you want to disappear and blast roids, you just don't tell USADA where you are. And what are the chances that they're going to randomly drug test you 3 times in the space of 2 weeks? Because USADA's been around for, 4, 5, 6 years now? I can't remember how long, but it's been a good number of years. And they just gave Usman his 25 clean test jacket. So it's certainly less than 1 a week they're doing, random test average, even on the top stars. But anyway, the point is you are allowed 3 misses, either in a 1 year or a 2 year period. But it's 3 times you can just not be where you said you were, or where you were going to be. And it's an interesting thing because as someone who believes that fighters are continually being stiffed because they're independent contractors and not employees, which means that you don't have to offer them like a load of benefits that you would have to offer an employee. And I think it hampers the process of collectivizing as well. But anyway, as someone who thinks that the fighters are being stiffed by being independent contractors, I'm not going to be the one to be like, yeah, well, they should. Your employer should know where you are at all times. No, you're an independent contractor. Fuck them. But if the UFC did want to test them properly, they could make them employees and actually have punishments for missing 1 test or 2. I mean, 3 is a ridiculously high. I mean, it's evidenced by the fact that only 2 people have ever been caught missing 3 tests. But yeah, if you wanted to know how you cheat and pass USADA, that's your pretty much free way out. But then that's the point of USADA. They don't want to catch people. Like they caught, who did they catch last week? Like Ryan Benoit for Adderall or something like that. And he's not fought in the UFC since I think like 2019. Eric Koch was the other one, like 2 years retired already. They ain't catching like people who matter. Anyway, that's Yair's hilarious history with USADA out of the way. I think a lot of us thought that like he could be problematic for Holloway just with his speed early on, and also if Holloway's taken a lot of beatings or a lot of damage just training and fighting top level fighters as often as he has. But I think we also all thought like, oh yeah, Yair's going to have trouble going through the rounds. Gassed out hard against Jeremy Stevens, got stuck on the bottom in the third. Uses a lot of energy in his fights, and boxing isn't that slick. You know, if Max gets in his face and stays on him, it could be like another 500 punch beating. A lot of us thought. Well, probably not 500 punches because it was insane what Calvin Kattar just stood there and took. But respect to Yair Rodriguez because he gave an excellent account of himself, I thought, and Max had a lot of trouble with him. And it's interesting because like when we talk about stats and things, stats are largely bollocks. They can give you some ideas about things that happen in fights, but they don't tell you a whole lot. For instance, like there are takedowns and there are pushing people over while they're kicking, and both are legitimate takedowns and both can end up being the same thing, but they aren't. That's not like you've met the best of their wrestling resistance and gone through it. You know, if you bundle Khabib Nurmagomedov over while he's kicking, which could totally happen, or if like one of his flying knees against Edson Barboza, if he'd missed and Edson Barboza had just sort of stepped in on him and he'd fallen over, that would be a takedown. But we wouldn't be going like, well, I mean, some people might be like, damn, how good is Edson Barboza's wrestling? But yeah, stats obscure things and hide things. But the UFC stats, I remember what it was called this time, for this fight, I thought it was really interesting because I think they had, Yair landed something like 159 strikes. And Calvin Kattar, who took an absolute pasting, landed about 133. So in terms of damage taken, you could look at that and go, oh yeah, no, it's similar. But you know, the big difference is Calvin Kattar's punches were just things that came back while Max Holloway was delivering one-way traffic. In this one, Max landed half as many strikes as he did against Kattar, and he was eating big low kicks the entire time, stumbling all over the place. And Yair's punching, while it is like loopy basketball player punching, he was doing a decent job. He was being effective. He was hitting Holloway quite a lot. It's one of those things where I've come away from this fight, and I think what I said on Twitter was Yair Rodriguez is a good enough fighter that he's good without having to do the good things. Because one of the things we've always said about him and, even people like Zabit, there's an awful lot of guys who propel themselves into the upper echelons of MMA or towards it, but they have massive shortcomings in doing the right things, Well, if you don't know, I'll explain what I mean. If you saw... Well, coming into this fight, and I had a big rant about this on the Boycast, but whenever you hear someone say, he doesn't care if you take him down, normally over a highlight of them throwing up a wild triangle or something like that. No, because if they don't actually care if you take them down, they're going to lose fights because of that. Good fighters, or great fighters at the top of the sport, do very much care if you take them down. Charles Oliveira is one of the most active bottom players in MMA. Still cares if you take him down. Still, does try and stop the takedowns. Still acts as fast as possible to try and get up in the course of throwing up these triangles and arm bars. Yair Rodriguez is very much in that camp of people, him falling over off kicks and ending up on the bottom for a good period of time, throwing up wild submission attempts, doing like the Holetta sweep and stuff. But he will lose fights, or in the future he may lose fights, and certainly he lost a good portion of this fight because he just let himself get put on the bottom. And he has a style that plays into it. It's one thing to... Well, he does. He works every day on his takedown defense, and then he fights in a way where he gives away takedowns or top position without having to fight, or without the opponent having to fight for it. And the big key in this fight, the big difference between the two fighters, was watch how fucking fast Max Holloway gets up whenever he ends up on the bottom. Because there was a beautiful Giggler sweep, John Wayne sweep, twist sweep, one-armed man, what's the other one? Knee lever, whatever you want to call it. The dope-ass sweep that Mansour Barnoohi has made an MMA career out of. Yair Rodriguez hit one of those on Max Holloway from half guard in, I think it was the third round, got top position. Within half a minute, Max Holloway is up. And it's not like he just struggled his way up. He he retained his guard as Yair was trying to pass. He threw up an armbar. He ended up belly down. He went to his knees. Yair pushed back into him before he could scramble up fully, and then he got 2-on-1 on a wrist and scooted his way back to the fence and stood up. There was a lot going on, but he was constantly moving to get up. He wasn't constantly moving for the sake of doing flashy shit. But let's jump back. Let's go right back to the beginning of the fight. Let's talk about the striking, because that's the important point. How did the striking match up? And in the early going, it was a lot of the same things we expected. Shorter stance from Max, raising the lead leg quite a lot as a feint, using the rear leg to poke with little teeps, and then picking up the rear leg, stepping in with his right foot and throwing like a dipping right hook or a good right jab. And he popped him quite a few times with that. And that was expected. That's what he did against Anthony Pettis. That's something he does quite a lot. And we mentioned in the Boycast, Joe Schilling had a lot of success doing that. Joe Schilling is a guy who, well, since retiring, he's been a massive dude. He's just been knocking out random people. But when he was fighting, like people, because he got knocked out a lot in Bellator and he didn't have a great chin, a lot of people have retconned his kickboxing career so that it wasn't that good. He was always kind of goofy looking, his fighting style, and he had a win over like KO Klai, but very late in KO Klai's career. But he did have legit wins over people like Simon Marcus and Artem Levine. I just watched a robin fly into a fence post. That was bizarre. But one of the things that Schilling was good at was sort of throwing off good kickers and good combination punches by using these little pokey teeps with his rear leg. Because if you kick and he pokes you with a little stabby push kick with his right leg, you're going to fall over. That's what's going to happen. He's probably not going to wind you or hurt you, but he is going to knock you over. So it stops you from kicking as freely. And then what he'll do is he'll pick up that knee as if he's going to teep. You will prepare for it, and then he'll step in and punch you with the same hand. And Holloway does a ton of that. But then things got a little bit weird, because while Holloway had that awful trouble with the counter low kicks of Alexander Volkanovski in their first fight, in the second fight he came out raising the lead knee, starting in a shorter stance, moving in with feints and with actual kicks to get in range to box, and not just presenting his lead leg for the second fight. But in this fight, he knew the low kicks were coming, and then he still just kept presenting his lead leg as he jabbed. And he sort of abandoned the leg lifting and feinting stuff throughout the fight, and then came back to it later, remembering it. But there were periods where he was getting kicked with like 4 or 5 good calf kicks or thigh kicks in a row, and his stance is going all over the place. And luckily, he was able to take them very well. But he was still getting knocked out of his stance, and it did still look like it was hurting him. He just didn't end up limping, which is always a good sign. But he did switch to southpaw at certain points in this fight for a good length of time, as he did against Volkanovski the first time when he was having trouble. That could be because his lead leg, his left leg was hurt. That could be because he wanted to try and take away that kick a bit and offer them a different look. But it was very weird, because an awful lot of this fight was Yair being able to stay in it by punting the lead leg. And then there were a lot of the standard Holloway looks, lots of jabbing, double jabbing, throwing 1-2s, throwing flicky right straights that are just sort of jabs, doing his double jab and then right straight to the body. That right straight to the body where his elbow's out, flared, so it comes into like the ribs under the arm. The odd right hook to the body. Yeah, wasn't as much body work as I normally like to see from Max Holloway. Still, someone said on Twitter, too little body work in a Max Holloway fight is still more body work than most people in MMA are doing. But what I really liked early was, I said this in the Boycast, I said one of the things that if you can say that there's a flaw with Max Holloway, or something you don't like about Max Holloway, for me, it is that he's very well-rounded on the feet, so well-rounded on the feet in terms of like how many skill sets he has from both stances. He can be a kicker, he can be a boxer, he can be an elbows and uppercuts guy. He's very adaptable on the feet because he's got so many talents and skills there. But he very rarely shows any attempt to take the opponent down because he's so competent on the feet and so comfortable changing what he does there. And threatening the takedown, he has a good ground game. He has a terrific guillotine for a start, but he has a great ground game. And he could be using that to threaten people. But more than that, threatening takedowns on the feet opens up more stuff on the feet. And we talked about how Yair Rodriguez has trouble when guys hold him down. If you put him against the cage, he's kind of like Brian Ortega, where he's so obsessed with throwing up submissions that if you put him by the cage, he doesn't benefit from being there able to wall walk. A lot of good fighters, you have to pull them off the cage. Watch Frankie Edgar versus anyone who's not Yair Rodriguez. But against people like Yair Rodriguez, Brian Ortega, you put them on the cage because they're not going to try and get up. They're going to get carried away trying to throw up submissions while you're stacking them up and smushing their head against the cage. And they probably 99% of the time can't throw up an effective submission because you're cramped up on top of them, punching down on them. Certainly, this guy has done the Holeta sweep on people, which is where you take them over the top. If they stand in your guard, you catch their wrists and you take them over your head, like a Tomoe Nage throw in judo. Frankie Edgar pushes him to the fence, stands up in his guard. Yair's head is pushed against the fence. Edgar is resting the top of his own head on the fence, standing over Yair. Yair can't sweep him overhead, can't throw up an armbar because, not only are his hips stacked, but Edgar's head is on the fence, so he can't go over the top of it. And he can't up kick that effectively because he's just so crumpled up. But yeah, we were saying not really an issue fighting Max Holloway, which is a bit of a sad thing. But from the very early going, like before anything started going wrong, before he started getting low kicked or anything like that, Max was already showing the Frankie Edgar favorite, the post single, which is where you slam your lead hand into their lead shoulder to lighten their leg and you try and pick it up. And it's one of those great techniques where if you shoot a big double leg or something like that and you fail, there's a great chance the other guy sprawls on the back of your head and you're stuck face down on the mat. Think Ryan Bader versus Anthony Rumble Johnson. Think Stipe versus Ngannou. It's not good. But with the post single, you either pick up their leg and then they're fighting off a takedown attempt. You can reel them in on a single leg, or let go of it and kick them or punch them, which Max did a couple of times in this fight. Or you don't get it and you're still standing upright. You're not ducking down in on them. You're not diving, throwing yourself onto your knees. You're just pushing them in the shoulder and trying to pick up their lead leg. And it messes with people so much. Frankie Edgar's made an entire career out of doing that. But you saw how useful it is in this fight. Max was going to it. But more than that, sometimes when Yair kicked, he'd just step in and push his shoulder anyway. And that's how the first takedown came. He just pushed him over on one leg. Because no matter how good you are when you're kicking, you're still on one leg, which is why people like, who's the most successful Nak Muay to ever, or rather, the most successful high-level Nak Muay to become a high-level mixed martial artist is Ramba Somdet, who was a Shuto champion. He was the best men's strawweight in the world, I think, for quite a long time. And he did that by developing like a surprisingly good guard and decent takedown defense. But in Muay Thai, he'd always been a good kicker. He did pounded the inside low kick constantly. The step up left inside low kick. Comes to MMA, you watch his fight like against Ulysses Gomez or something like that. He's standing longer, he's bouncing in and out, he's trying to counterpunch with big punches. And he does. He successfully knocks Ulysses Gomez down with I think it's a counter uppercut or something like that. But he's having to be a boxer puncher, which is part of his skill set in Muay Thai. But a lot of the things that he does, mainly in Muay Thai, he can't do freely because people will just bundle him over. And it gets worse because people like Big John will score that as a knockdown, as we found out in Lima versus MVP 2. But the fight took its shape. Max trying to apply pressure and counter hit every time Yair threw a kick, or keeping Yair on the back foot so that he didn't kick. Yair throwing big loopy shots with his hands and trying to land knockout punches every time, getting his head snapped back like a Pez dispenser. Some of these shots from Yair getting jabbed, his head just goes fully back. I know Max isn't a huge hitter and he doesn't fight like he wants to knock people out. It's like Gene Tunney. He used to say that he didn't put his body into his punches. He said straight hitting should be done entirely from the arms, which obviously Jack Dempsey, his nemesis, was completely against. Jack Dempsey believed every blow should have the body weight behind it. But there were some very interesting moments when Max got to the fence, got Rodriguez to the fence, because Rodriguez would try and crouch down and come up with the counter up elbow. And by up elbow, I don't mean comb your hair up elbow. I mean the back elbow that Anderson Silva knocked out Tony Frickland with. Now, nobody has ever been caught with that like Tony Frickland before or since. Tony Frickland just got hypnotized by what Anderson Silva was doing and got hit with a technique that was never used in MMA to that point. Since then, yeah, you're not going to catch people that often by just throwing it at them. You'll see the odd stepping one. I think Jojo Calderwood caught a good one on the regional scene. Charles Oliveira did one the other week. No, he was the other year, to be honest. But he caught someone in his little resurgence with one. But where they really are dangerous and where I'd love to see more people use them is on the counter, and particularly if you can get shoulder rolling. Because shoulder rolling, the value of it is the same as shoulder rolling in boxing. You are putting your hands down. You are putting yourself in a position where you look weak, but you are actually strong. Because you want the opponent to punch, you're going to take it on your shoulder, and there the moment that you take a punch on your shoulder, they're close enough to hit. So you can do it by feel. I mean, you have to see the punch coming to take it on your shoulder, but the moment that you felt it, you know that they're close enough to hit with a counter, which is the hard point of counter hitting to begin with. Or the hard point of hitting anyone to begin with is the constant distraction of visuals and distance. But more than that, the back elbow comes from the position that you would be shoulder rolling from with the lead hand low. So Brian Ortega actually did it a couple of times against Max Holloway. Anderson Silva tried it against Michael Bisping. I included it I included a doodle of it and some talk about it in Advanced Striking 2.0 Anderson Silva, which is free. That's open for everyone. That's not a boy special. So if you've not read that, go to thefightprimer.com, read it now. Advanced Striking 2.0 Anderson Silva. But yeah, Yair was going to the cage and crouching over or bending over as Holloway came in and trying to throw these back up elbows. And first round, he just sort of lanced him under the chin, just sort of grazed him. And Max was a lot more careful after that. What he'd do was he'd reach out and put his hands on Yair. Instead of punching for him, he'd put his hands on him and sort of check his shoulders. Yair was also trying to spin into back elbows constantly. So you saw Holloway keeping a hand on him a lot of the time, having a feel on him. And then he'd also try and do like little jump in knees to try and catch him either in the body if he stood up or in the head if he was leaning over, and then snapping his head down, which allowed him to threaten the guillotine, because the Max Holloway guillotine has always been a bit of a specialist move for him. He's very good at it. Caught Cub Swanson with it. Who else did he catch with it? A couple of guys. But it was really interesting because I think it was round 3 or round 2. But in one of these rounds, he snaps him down from along the fence where Yair is bending over and waiting to throw a big counter elbow or a back elbow, an overhead back elbow like he caught Zombie with. And Holloway just moves in, snaps his head into the armpit, starts cranking on the fucking guillotine. I think he had Buddha fist grip, which is make a fist with your choking hand, put your and point it up, and then put your palm of your other hand on the pinky side and push. Cody McKenzie was very good with the Buddha fist guillotine. And the value of the guillotine was further illustrated by the fact that Yair went to his back to defend the guillotine. And Max, I think, got all the way to the mount trying to guillotine him. But I think that was the first sort of extended ground exchange, because that was the point where Max realized, yeah, I'm actually having a lot of success here, and started pursuing the takedowns more frequently. There was a really good one, which was straight out of Sakuraba's playbook, where Max, and this is another example of kicking with the kicker. Doesn't matter that Yair Rodriguez's kicks are harder than yours. If you low kick him and you want him to low kick back specifically so you can duck in on the takedown, yeah, there's value in you low kicking. So Max throws a stumpy little low kick, and then he waits there while Yair throws one back at him. And the moment Yair throws one back at him, he ducks in and double legs him. It was straight out of Sakuraba's playbook. If you watch Sakuraba versus Vandy 1, if you watch Sakuraba versus Vernon Tiger White, any of those early Sakuraba fights, he works out, like one of the things he works out early because he's not training any striking is that he can kick really hard. So he kicks people in the legs until they kick him back. And the moment they kick him back, he dives in on their legs. Or he'll kick him in the leg, and the next time they'll pick their leg up to check, and he'll shoot on the standing leg. Or the other one he'd do like an inside low kick, like a step up inside low kick, and then the opponent would do it back, and he'd just duck down on the leg that's kicking, because you're basically putting your leg out there straight. So he'd duck down and fall on the low single, which I've never seen anyone do since. So that was very cool. If I ever get round to doing Filthy Casuals Guide Sakuraba Part 2, it's the takedown. So look forward to that, or don't. But the ground game was quite compelling because Holloway was doing very effective passing and holding of top half. We're always talking about this, like, knee shield is playing half guard. No knee shield is being smashed. Like, if you watch any top passer in no-gi, the goal is to get to flattened half guard. If you watch George St. Pierre, the goal is to get to flattened half guard. If you watch BJ Penn, even, very different fighter, same goal, get to flattened half guard. Because flattened half guard is basically a pin where knee shield half guard is an actual guard. So Holloway kept flattening him out to half guard and holding him there and threatening to pass. And it's a very hard position to get out of. There was an interesting one where he passed and Yair was on his side with his top knee in between him and Max. And it was sort of stopping Max from getting hip to hip and flattening him. And Max is trying to grind over it. And then he switches his hips back the other way and knees Yair in the body at the same time. And you could see Yair wince and the top knee just popped out. And Max was in a proper flattened side control. Sorry, flattened half guard. Oh, no, it was side control, that one. But yeah, very cool. Knees to the body on the ground. Don't see him enough. Need him all the time. There was a moment in this fight where Max, I think, had him almost cradled from, like he was in side control. Or no, Yair was rolling away from him. And he had the opportunity to cradle him. I was just thinking, like, cradle him and knee his kidneys. Like, fuck, who is that mad boxer? Mayorga? Fuck, can't remember his name. But there was a boxer who had one MMA fight. And he'd kneed a guy in the spine until he submitted. No, knees to the kidney, man. That would be awful. If you remember GSP versus Sarah, that was such a good, the second one. Sarah goes to Turtle and he keeps rolling back, like Graham being back to closed guard because George keeps passing his guard. In fact, George is passing his guard exactly the same way we just said. He forces the half and then he passes to side control. And then Matt will turn to his elbows and knees, Turtle, and then he'll roll back to closed guard or try and stand up, but mainly roll back to closed guard. But St. Pierre would have one arm across his back to keep him from rolling, and then he'd grab Matt's nearest hand and pin it to the mat. What he'd do is, like, he'd punch the head a couple of times, so Matt's elbow would come up to block it, like answering the phone, and then GSP would pin that hand to the mat where it was, so that the big gap between his elbow and ribs was still there, and then GSP just hammered his ribs with knees. And he got so winded that, like, GSP was able to jump to his feet and just, like, put the boots to him, basically kneeing his body. Such a good fight, actually. Probably the most aggressive GSP looked since his, like, early run for the title. GSP Sarah 2, for those who are... I'm trying to repeat everything I say now, because I shouted out Hectic 1 on Twitter, or to follow him on Twitter the other week, and everyone's going, Hector Guan? And I was like, oh no, I just said it very quickly. Hectic 1. But yeah, the difference in the ground game was Max got up really quickly. Max did get taken down once, but I think it was a sort of bundly off a kick. Can't remember what it was. But I said after this fight on Twitter, this fight made me want to see Max versus wrestlers. And I think a lot of people took that to be like, because he looked crap. And I suppose that's probably because a lot of the time I am moaning. But what I meant was it was really interesting because before the Habib matchup, you remember when Max was going to fill in for Tony in that doomed New York event. Was it Tony? Fuck. Whoever he was filling in for. It was a fight that was made for about a day, and then they had to call it off because I think Max couldn't make the weight cut safely or something like that. Or that might have been all linked with that time that he had the concussion and they had to like cancel a fight because of it. You remember when he had the slurry interview with Bisping? But anyway, Max had this matchup for a day, and I did a little article on it on the Fight Primer. And then the fight was cancelled before the article was even published. So I called it like the lost article, the lost fight, or whatever it was. But I said it was quite interesting because Max hasn't fought an awful lot of like balls to the wall wrestlers, except like Dennis Bermudez way back when he was coming up. But it's worked out that there aren't an awful lot of wrestlers at the top end of the featherweight class because he's fought everyone in the top 15 basically of featherweight. But he does have very strong takedown defense. He's got something like an 85% takedown defense rate. And even when he has been taken down, because Volkanovski got him down a couple of times in their rematch, even when he has been taken down, he gets up really quick. And a lot of it is it's a load of skills, but part of it is the footwork. If he's fighting someone if he realizes someone's trying to take him down, he adjusts his footwork, he keeps the distance, and he fights appropriately. But more than that, like his footwork on the cage, if guys pick up the single, or if guys go for the double and he forces them down onto the single. He'll hop to the fence. He'll try and fight off the single. If guys pin him to the fence with the underhook pin or on a double leg, he will fight off one of their hands. And then what they do, and everyone does this, including Habib, if you can't get the body lock or the double leg, you switch to a grip between the legs for a single leg. And you can go onto the single leg. You can try and pick him up like Habib often does, with like a high crotch grip, or the deadlift under the taint is what I call it. That's how he got Connor and Dustin down, because they both fought the hand for a very long time. But if you can get the guy to switch off to the single, you get the chance to hop out towards the center of the cage and limp leg out. And that's what Holloway did here against Yair. He built himself up along the fence, fought off the hands. Yair dropped on the single. The moment he did, Holloway hopped off the fence towards the middle of the cage and pulled his leg away. And he's very good at that. And he's very good at getting up. He's very good at using two-on-one grips on one of their wrists and using it to build up. He's very good at wall walking. You know, he's very good at an awful lot of the get-up skills or the don't get taken down skills. And we don't get to see him enough because he's fighting people like Brian Ortega, who I think has completed 2 takedowns in his entire MMA career, or UFC career at least. But what I think impressed me most in this fight, you know, having jizzed all over Holloway's performance here, was Yair Rodriguez has had a great gas tank sometimes. And I said that on Twitter. I was like, sometimes, 3 asterisks. But I always thought, like, you know, when someone's had, like, great gas tanks sometimes, and it's, like, on their terms, like in that Yair versus Caceres fight, which a lot of people were like, this is high-level MMA. And I was like, no, they're just spinning, doing bollocks. It's not high-level MMA, because all of their techniques are being mitigated by just backing up. What would happen was one guy would spin, the other guy would back up, and it would fall short. And then the other guy would spin, and the other guy would back up. There was no subtlety. There was no setups. There was no cleverness. It was just spinning around like a loon. But it was in, like, Mexico City, so it was at elevation of 50,000 feet or something. And he just kept going the entire time. But there's a difference between having a great gas tank on your terms and having a great gas tank when someone's beating the shit out of you. And the fight with Jeremy Stephens, he beat the shit out of Jeremy Stephens he had a good first round. He almost killed Jeremy Stephens in the second round. And in the third round, he was tired, and Jeremy Stephens took him down and beat him up. Or just held him there for a lot of that round too. But Yair couldn't do anything about it. It was really weird, because he'd previously been big brothering this guy. And then it was like he'd just been held down and they went, stop it. Calm down. Yeah, that was it looked like his gas tank then. But in this one, like he was opening his mouth, breathing and stuff, but that's not really gassed. He was still going hard in round 5 against the highest paced guy possibly in MMA, while taking an awful lot of nasty shots, a lot of head trauma, and bodywork too. So, mad respect to Yair Rodriguez. I think I certainly have a tendency to hate on him, or I did, because I look at him and I go, there's a lot of talent there. There's a lot of specific skills, but this man is going to lose fights because of weaknesses in his overall game, which are, it's like when we were talking about Brian Ortega and takedowns and things, and wall walking. If you go to your average MMA gym in wherever town you live, or not every town has them, whatever region you live, you go to the MMA gym, the best guy there will be good at a number of things, and they're normally the wall walk, setting up low kicks, all basic bread and butter vanilla MMA skills. And if you're very good at other things, like you've got a wicked kicking game, or you've got wicked jiu-jitsu from the bottom, it's very easy to not develop those skills that are so fundamental to good MMA. And I feel like Yair is lacking in a lot of those areas. And I also feel like there's an awful lot of decision-making that is bad on his part. But frankly, he's good enough that he can compete with Max Holloway in a good, closely fought bout without doing any of those things. So yeah, it'll frustrate me if he never does those things, but fuck it. What's the problem? He's already proving himself as elite in that division. And I'm going to extend that same olive branch to Zabit, because he's a guy who does a ton of wacky shit and doesn't do a lot of good best practices stuff. But yeah, I mean, he's still beating people. So, I mean, he hasn't beaten the level of competition that... I mean, he's in a similar situation to Yair, where it's like, if he fights Max Holloway, that is also going to be his first step up against really elite level competition. But yeah, go on. I'll allow him that. I've come to make peace with the two people in the division who annoy me the most. Right, I've recorded for like half an hour and we've done one fight. So let's have a look at some of the rest of these fights. They weren't amazing, to be honest. They were just good. But then this is the thing. I felt like this card was a mercy booking because the UFC could have gone back to Norma Dumont main events. But there is a Misha Tate main event next week, and the card isn't great either. There's a couple of good ones on there. Davy Grant versus Adrian Yanez is hidden on there. It's the first fight on the main card. But otherwise, the card is pretty... but this Holloway-Rodriguez fight, it felt kind of like, just so you don't go cold turkey, just so you don't die of toxic shock when we take away the good fights again. But what else was fun on this card? There was a good amount of finishes, but what else was fun? I mean, in the co-main event, Marcus Rogerio de Lima, has he broken his streak of alternate wins and losses that goes back to 2014? Holy shit, he has. Okay, so he KO'd Ben Rothwell. Nice calf kick into left hook and then into spaz. Calf kick, left hook, right straight caught Rothwell coming out like back onto balance. Love seeing people punch off kicks. The traditional Dutch way is, of course, to punch, kick instead of kick into punches, which you can do with the calf kick because you're breaking the balance. Not an awful lot to say about that, except for Herb Dean fucked it up again. Watched Ben Rothwell collapse a couple of times amid this punching flurry. And then stops it as Ben Rothwell's ducking it on a takedown. And then almost allows it to continue while De Lima's shouting like, hey, you just stopped it. And then stops it again for real. It was very it was it Rodriguez versus Michelle Rodriguez versus Amanda Ribas? Was that Herb Dean also like going to stop the fight and then not stopping the fight and then stopping the fight? But he kicked one of the fighters in the head when he was trying to stop the fight the first time. They went, oh, actually no. Yeah, he's getting worse by the day. I mean, no one really considers him the gold standard anymore. He's making more and more mistakes. And I wouldn't mind so much if it weren't for, and I keep bringing it up, but the Jai Herbert's knockout. Dan Hardy was made into the bad guy in that whole situation. And yeah, fine, you could complain about professionalism, but they also want all the commentators to jump up and scream every time there's a knockout so that they can show the slow motion of them jumping up and screaming. But that was Herb Dean insisted that questioning his decision was dangerous to the fighters. And then after the fact, couldn't go back and say, yeah, no, I think I made a mistake there. If you compare that to Jason Herzog, who was, I consider him one of the best referees consistently. He's the official referee of the Jack Slack podcast. But he has made mistakes because it's a very hard job. One of the most obvious mistakes he made was letting Anthony Smith just get murdered. His teeth were coming out. And then he went for another 2 rounds against Glover Teixeira. Part of that's on the corner, but this is MMA. Corners won't stop fights. They still think he's going to submit him with a knee bar from the turtle or something. But a lot of it's on Jason Herzog, who should have said, nope, too much punishment, nothing coming back. You're not intelligently defending yourself. Doing just enough to stay alive is not really being in the fight. And after that fight, Jason Herzog put out a statement, an official statement, and said, look, I feel like I did the wrong thing in that fight. If that situation arises again, I will do the right thing. And that's all you have to say. You have to say, yeah, I made a mistake, and I will do better next time. You're not going to get sued by that guy for letting the fight go on too long. He didn't care to begin with. But Herb Dean has to pretend that he was retroactively all his decisions were right. It's like when I post a photo, a clip of someone getting elbowed in the back of the head and a ref missing it. There's one ref on my Facebook who has to jump out and take the side of the ref immediately without any dignity. No, it's just retroactively the ref must have been right. So let's work backwards from there. But anyway, I'm glad everyone's seeing that Herb is making more and more mistakes. We need to send him off to do commentary in Bellator. Felicia Spencer versus Leah Letson. What the fuck was this? Someone said that it's Leah Letson apparently is in the army or something like that. And it was, it was Remembrance Day over here, but it would be Veterans Day over there. Is that holiday? Is that one of the 10 days of holiday you guys get a year? But But yeah, she was in the military, and then they were like, "So we're going to put her on the card." Someone tweeted me that it was to honor disabled veterans. We're going to make another one. I was like, "Fucking hell, that's awful." But she like had nothing because Felicia Spencer is in a bad division. There aren't a lot of good fighters. Even within that division, there aren't a lot of good fighters. Like I wouldn't say that she's a great fighter in the grand scheme of things, but she's better than this lass, and she's better than the guys, the part timers they can find who aren't one of the three featherweights already on roster. And Felicia Spencer kept taking her to the clinch, to the fence, driving her head into Leah Letson's. And like Leah Letson made Felicia Spencer look like prime Cain Velasquez, is what I said. Because she got the underhook, she drove her head into her face, and then she was punching like in front of her own head. And Leah Letson couldn't do anything about it. Like with Cain Velasquez, he kept having to change off. He kept going to singles. He kept coming back up on the underhook. He'd grab the body lock. He'd sling him around. He'd go back into the underhook pin. There was a lot of movement going on because guys won't just let you stay there. But Felicia Spencer was basically allowed to stay there and just batter this lass. But there was a moment actually in the second round where Leah Letson did a takedown and got her down, got Felicia Spencer down. And there was a move by Felicia Spencer that I thought was quite cool and I now want to try. And I was like, is that just working because she's not very good? Or is that going to work if I try that no-gi? She was in closed guard. She got double underhooks. From there, you'd normally kick out to like, you'd try and grapevine and get to maybe butterflies like Rob Whittaker did against Yoel Romero. But you could also like open your legs and try and come up on a half guard single. But Felicia Spencer opens her legs, inserts one butterfly hook. So she's got a double underhooks with her arms, puts the left butterfly hook in. I'm like, hold up, what's going on here? Is she going to elevate her onto another butterfly hook? No, she ducks under the armpit on Leah Letson's, on her right side. So the opposite side to the one she's got the butterfly hook in. She lifts her elbows up and gets under Leah Letson's armpit and just performs the duck under, like in wrestling. I was like, oh, that's amazing. I wonder if that will work on anyone who's alive, who's not been battered for a round and a half or whatever it was. But it was very cool. I'll try, actually, I won't put a clip on Twitter because I don't want the UFC banning me from Twitter. But yeah, go look it up. Round 2 of that fight. Felicia Spencer gets taken down, gets double underhooks, inserts one butterfly hook, ducks under the armpit, and comes up on the back. Incredible. Chaos Williams versus Miguel Baeza. I was very impressed by Chaos Williams here because I thought he was like Abdul... what's his name? Oh, he's fought him. I could just check here. Abdul Razak Al Hassan, who's, 30-second fighter. But he stayed with Baeza here through the entire fight and he caught him late. And Baeza was doing a good job taking his leg out. Baeza looked uncharacteristically skittish because I remember him fighting... it was the fight that he popped into my consciousness. Hold on, what was it? Maybe Hector Aldana in 2019? But yeah, he was just backing him up the whole time and battering him. And in this one, he's running around the edge of the cage looking skittish. But in was it the first round? Baeza got on a leg and was going to finish a heel hook, and a lot of people were like, oh, heel hooks don't work in MMA, or how would you finish that heel hook? I think one of the things that I noticed was, and Bisping was saying that he should do this, was that he was still trying to get the heel hook. He was on an inside heel hook, and I think it was from 50-50, but he was trying to get the heel hook and then rotate himself back to the other side, so turn his shoulders away. And that's sort of the old school method for finishing the heel hook. A lot of guys like Craig Jones, Lachlan Giles, Gordon Ryan, Gary, basically any of the elite leg lockers nowadays tend to get the grip, and then they tend to finish by bridging their hips into the knee. Mikey Musumeci has an interesting take on it, which is like he gets control above and below the knee, locks the heel in place or the foot in place, and then he moves above and below the knee away from in one direction, and the knee itself with his hips he pushes in the opposite direction. Basically, the theme with a lot of modern heel hooking is to move the knee, and that causes the catastrophic damage with the foot locked in place, as opposed to treating the everything below your legs, which are locked around the thigh, as the part that's moving. You grab the heel and then you turn away, which is you could still absolutely break someone's leg like that, like Ken Shamrock versus Alex Striebling in Pancrase, where he just gets on this guy's heel and the guy doesn't know what's going on, and Ken just turns complete 180 from one shoulder to the other, and this guy screams. It's horrible. But nowadays, guys are very good at fighting the hands. Guys are very good at slipping the heel. Typically, you'll see guys lock the foot into place and then bridge into it. Also means you're less likely to slip off with the elbow as you rotate over your own body. Not saying he'd have got the finish. I'm just saying that's the modern meta for finishing heel hooks. But it also reminded you that like getting punched in the face does make a difference, because Chaos Williams looked like he was walloping him, even though he was sat on his ass where you shouldn't be able to. This is the thing, like punching Purity with your body weight behind a punch, literally impossible if you're sat on your butt and the guy's on your leg. But you can still arm punch pretty hard. Peter Pano versus Andrei Arlovsky. Andrei Arlovsky, there was a guy, I can't remember who it was, but he said that Andrei Arlovsky fought like the angriest girl you've ever seen, because he used to like grab the fence, pull the hair, especially back in the day. But this was Lion Hair Arlovsky, when he was like one of the most attractive men in sports. And Peter Pano, who's a jiu-jitsu legend, I suppose, is on his leg. And I think it was Herb Dean back in the day. Herb Dean comes in for some reason. I think Arlovsky's been holding the fence or something like that on his butt. And Herb Dean comes in, and Herb Dean's like, "Are you ready?" And Arlovsky goes, "Yes," and immediately punches Peter Pano in the face, knocks him, well, maybe doesn't knock him unconscious, but knocks him into an unresponsive position from on his butt. So Arlovsky just comes up on top of him and finishes him off. It's a really weird fight. Go watch that one. Marcio Cruz is Peter Pano's name, against Andrei Arlovsky. But yeah, Chaos Williams could twat you from his butt. Song Yadong versus Julio Arce. I thought this one was, I was expecting a banger. The finish was banger. It was a little bit slow boil. Lovely high kick from Yadong. You know, I was going to write a load of puns about Yadong pounding Arce and Arce on top of Yadong and, you know, all those ones, but I didn't bother. That's how obsessed I was with the main event and how little I cared about this fight when it happened. Or rather, how uneventful most of this fight was. But it was decent. Good stoppage good finish rather for Song Yadong, because Julio Arce, like I said I said on the Boycast, sneaky good. Only lost his split decisions in like his last 11 fights. Joel Alvarez versus Thiago Moises. Joel Alvarez has got to be number 5 in the world at lightweight now, right? Thiago Moises, never that good, but was somehow ranked number 50 in the world at some point, immediately after losing to Bobby Green, because they wanted to elevate Islam Makhachev. Joel Alvarez looked dope in this fight. Love the double attack between the right elbow or right hand and the right knee. You don't see an awful lot of right knee work. Beneil Dariush used to do it occasionally. He'd throw the overhand, and then he'd throw an overhand onto the opponent's guard and hit him with the spearing right knee as they raised their elbow. But yeah, he was smashing him to the body with these knees. Beautiful elbows off the right hand. And just got the stoppage really quickly. Just walked him down. Do I remember much of Joel Alvarez? Because I like him. I now like his style. Oh, he armbarred someone at Khabib versus Gaethje. Oh, and he choked out Joe Duffy. God. Yeah, no, I do remember him, actually. Yeah, I remember him as one of Joe Duffy's inexplicable losses, despite being an incredibly talented guy. Anything else good on this fight? Sean Woodson fighting like an alien. Do you know what I do like about Sean Woodson? The dynamic changes between his striking. He doesn't throw everything at 100% speed. Sometimes he just pitches slow balls. His body shots, he goes in, he just sort of slaps them in there. But they hurt people. He's digging them in. He's just not throwing them very fast. And that's good. You don't need to throw everything at 100 miles an hour, because then not only is everything the same speed, but as you slow down, everything stays the same speed, but everything slows down together. Whereas if you throw things at different speeds throughout the bout, you can still catch people by surprise with quick techniques later on. You know, Max doesn't punch at full speed all the time. It's it's cool. Whereas Yair does, and still was there in the 5th round doing the same. So mad respect to him. Then Rafael Alvarez guillotine choked Mark Jacasey. Was impressed by that. And Kennedy Nzechukwu did his thing where he covers up, and then suddenly it stopped working and he just got knocked out. But otherwise, yeah, an okay card. Good main event. Right, we've got some time, so let's do a question. Hi, Jack. Thanks for all the great content you put out there. I just watched your Filthy Casuals Guide to Piotr Yan, and like every other time, it's like having a magic trick explained. Before a fighter is just good/great/unbeatable due to some inscrutable factor, after it's okay, he does this thingy and that other one. Yet their next fight comes, and it often looks like their opponent is totally oblivious to that. I understand that a fighter can't change their game completely and has limited room for adaptation. But how much do you think is that as opposed to bad film analysis and game planning? Marvin Vittori's neighbours watching his fights outdoors. Bless, David. I think this is an interesting question because it gets to sort of the heart of what we do on this podcast and what I used to do in articles. And it always made me laugh when, like, occasionally I'd get people, retweeting stuff to the fighter or to the opponent of the fighter in question, being like, "You need to check this out before Saturday." And a lot of them were joking, but some of them seemed to be serious. I remember I got a email from someone when I did a preview to like John Jones versus Vitor Belfort or something like that. And someone said, "Do you not feel like you've made it unfair for Vitor?" Or something? Oh no, I think I wrote something about Vitor rather than like the matchup because I thought it was more interesting. Like a lot of what I've done has always been on sort of whims. Sometimes I'll write about the matchup. Sometimes I'll write about one of the components in the matchup because I'm just more interested in writing about that week. And someone wrote me an email being like, "I do not feel like you've unfairly disadvantaged Vitor here. I mean, I want him to win, and he won't if you do." It's just very strange. It seemed very sincere, and I was just like, "No, that's not how this works. The way this works is that a fighter and his camp go to work 2 months, 3 months, 8 weeks to 12 weeks before when I've written the article. Some of these fights are on relatively short notice, but for good high-level fights, there's normally a good amount of build-up and time to train. And I write my articles or do my podcasts as and when things are coming up. I don't know what fight's happening after this Vieira Tate main event next week. It's at the point where, like, even if I could help someone, it's not going to help them because it takes weeks and months of prep to do things. So really, like, the value of my work is me saying, like, "Oh, I think it'd be interesting if this happens and this happens and this happens," or it'd be interesting to see if they put emphasis on this. I cannot say that, like, well, if you read this before Saturday, you need to change this. It's like everything in fighting. Everything it's not just one guy versus another. There's layers and layers of the fighter is acting as a poor conduit for his corner, and they're acting on whatever they've trained him for the last 12 months, and there's a lot of factors going in. I think most gyms have decent tape study places now. I don't think I'm doing anything magic. I just happen to have a fairly decent eye for this stuff, having been around it and studied it for fucking ever. And the other thing is that, like, it's not always that the camp failed to prepare someone for something. You can get in there and be like, "Oh shit, this is way harder than it was in training," because there are people who are just beastly strong. There are people who are just incredibly fast, or faster than you expected, or faster than the people you've been training with. You can get in there and your nerves can take a toll. Almost every fighter I know who loses in a big fight immediately starts thinking about the things that were wrong in that camp. I got food poisoning about 3 weeks ago, or I had a bad ankle or something like that. Because in their mind, like, there was something throwing them off. If they'd come on their A game, they'd have got it done. I think a lot of fighters a lot of the time we don't get to see what the actual game plan was because fighters will come in and abandon it either due to nerves or getting caught up in a fist fight, a firefight, or getting scared away from that game plan, or the opponent offering something completely different. I spent the week leading up to Colby versus Usman saying every time Usman went southpaw, Colby should have been throwing the calf kick from his southpaw stance because it's open for him. The thing is that by switching stances, Usman's opening up the door for that jab, but he's also opening up the door for Colby's calf kick. And then they came out for the rematch. Colby was looking for the calf kick all the time, but Usman never switched to make it easy for him. He just stayed orthodox the entire time. So you could train for something and then it not be there. I think it's weird because sometimes camps aren't seeing things. I have had fighters tell me that, like, "Oh, we didn't see that." But a lot of the time, like, camps have seen things. You will see coaches get very frustrated because they'll be like, "That's not what we trained." I mean, think of Aspen Ladd the other day with her corner going like, "What's the plan here? What are you doing? I came to do this game plan, but you're doing something different." And that goes back to the whole Teddy Roosevelt, "It's not the critic, it's the man in the arena." Yeah, once you're under the ring lights, it's a lot harder to stay on plan. And that's why it's such a rare skill. That's why, when I was saying like Manny Pacquiao or people like that, guys who can throw their combinations, move their feet, exit from the combination by moving their head consistently for 12 rounds are fucking rooster's teeth. Caleb Plant gave a great account of himself for 6 rounds. Started breaking down after that. it's almost impossible to be disciplined and follow your training and your instructions and fight scientifically over a long period. And that's when conditioning becomes the ultimate weapon in fighting. But more importantly than that, like, being rattled mentally will very quickly get a guy away from his game plan before he's tired. So it's not always as cut and dry. You know, it's one thing for me to say after a fight, like, Jesus, what were they thinking? But you don't know if they weren't coached that. You don't know what they were doing in the training room. There are some, like, Stipe's camp always had bizarre moments in the corner. Like, oh, yeah, no, Stipe invented body punching against Daniel Cormier in the 4th round. And you're going, I have watched Josh Barnett, Frank Mir, who else? Someone else. Oh, Anderson Silva, John Jones, all have terrific success hitting Daniel Cormier in the body. And you're telling me that your fighter came up with it and saved himself in the 4th round. So yeah, there are some gyms that you go like, ooh, God, what's happening there? But on the whole, it also, like, it's hugely affected by your own, I want to say filter, but I don't want to be like Gracie filter. You know, I'm going to see things differently to someone else. One coach is going to see things very differently to someone else. Your boxing coach is going to be convinced that you can that there's a big opening in the boxing that you can exploit, while your grappling coach is going to be like, no, get him to the ground, do the Imanari roll. And I think that's the difficult thing about analysing fights generally. I think particularly for coaches, because you are going to lean so heavily on what you know and teach and practice. Whereas for me, there's like 4 things in all the things we talk about, ground and standing, that I am comfortable enough that I would say I'm quite proud of that. I could hit that on someone decent. There's about 4 things total. And we talk about millions of things. So I think it's easier for me to just talk about everything as if they're all equal and everyone could do everything, which obviously isn't the case. But anyway, thank you for the kind words. And yeah, I do feel like I often give people the wrong impression by being very hard on camps. And I think that it's very easy to forget that there is a lot of mental and physical aspects that can take a fighter off the game that he might have spent the last 3 months training for. Plus, as you said, like, some fighters just cannot do one thing. You know, it's wonderful when you find an Israel Adesanya where he's kickboxing and then he can stop a takedown really well. But some fighters just cannot do certain aspects of the game that you want them to. And we'll never be able to learn that. And that's just something about coordination and how your mind and body learn. You know, there are the Bo Jacksons of the world who can go from one sport into another, but I bet there was something that Bo Jackson sucked at that you on paper would have gone, surely it's just the same as the other 2 things that you're very good at. Anyway, cheers, David. Right, I've rambled long enough for this week. I will be back on Wednesday, Thursday with the Boycast, and we'll be getting hype for Misha Tate versus Katlyn Vieira. And there might be a Bellator going on. I can't remember. And of course, there's news stories and all sorts of other stuff to talk about too. So yeah, we'll be entertaining. Anyway, if you want to read the articles, listen to the Boycast, support the podcast, sign up to the Patreon. If you want to send an email to the podcast, jackslackpodcast@gmail.com. And if you want to see what I'm writing at any time and read that Anderson Silva Advanced Striking 2.0 piece for free, go to fightprimer.com. I am your boy, Jack Slack. Max Holloway's hair growing upwards forever bless.